The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com.
After a nearly 2-year investigation, the final report by the House Intelligence Committee concludes that the CIA, quote, ensured sufficient security for CIA facilities in Benghazi and bravely assisted the State Department on September 11th, 2012, during the deadly attack on U.S. facilities in Libya. That's the first conclusion of the report. Thousands and thousands of hours of investigation went into this report and into the event that led to the death of U.S. Ambassador Chris Stevens and 3 other Americans. The committee also found that the U.S. diplomat's temporary mission facility was not well protected. Many people have agreed with that for a long time, and remember that Democrats and Republicans, but more recently Republicans, refused requests to increase funding for protection at embassies and consulates. Fox News, of course, cheerleaders have been cheerleading the conspiracy fear-mongering around Benghazi for years. You would imagine they would really want to drill down and focus in on this report, which says there were no such intelligence failures before Benghazi. Of course, that didn't happen. Instead, here's Fox News dismissing the report in less than 30 seconds. Take a look at this.
But first, the House Intelligence Committee says the CIA's initial assessment of the Benghazi terror attacks 2 years ago, that they were in fact terrorist in nature, was accurate. The panel's report was released today. It says CIA and Obama administration officials later supported the incorrect scenario that the attacks were motivated by an internet video and stuck with that for several days. Also today, a new United Nations report reinforces the belief that the attacks were led by al-Qaeda. That contradicts the strenuous denials from the Obama administration. A sudden change means...
But Solyndra or the latte salute or something. No, Lewis, just dismissing it altogether and almost pretending like this didn't even really happen.
Yes, I think they kind of have to keep this alive if they want to use it against Hillary in the upcoming presidential election. So I think that we have not even come close to hearing the end of the Benghazi nonsense.
Well, Fox has invested so much time on air into convincing their audience that this was a huge conspiracy, Democratic intelligence failures, etc. They've created a situation where they can't just now come clean and say, here's yet another report, this one, the primary one we've all been waiting on, that says there were no intelligence failures, and they've been tirelessly promoting all of the Benghazi conspiracy theories. In the 20 months following the attacks, listen to this, Fox ran over 1,100 segments of Benghazi and hosted Republicans at a rate of 30-1 over Democrats to discuss the issue. Lewis, if I've never seen Fair and Balanced, I would imagine this is it.
Yeah, I can't even see the other scale. It's, the other half of the scale. It's so crooked. But, what would Fox News say if you confronted them with these numbers?
Well, they would control the entire situation so that you weren't able to, I guess. And eventually, I'm assuming some reasonable thinking individual will be on there booked for maybe something different and will bring this up as an aside. Their mic will be cut and they'll never be allowed on Fox again, as usually happens. Another note, on November 23rd, Fox News Sunday did not even mention the report's findings to viewers. Fox News Sunday has been obsessed with Benghazi for years. Huge report comes out. They just don't even mention it, Lewis. It's just not worth it, I guess, to waste time on that.
No, it's a waste of time for Fox, of course, because it just is not aligned with their agenda. And I look forward to hearing more about this from Fox News. It's good entertainment, if anything.
We've been talking about the just shameful rewriting of Texas textbooks that has been going on for a long time now. I've mentioned the documentary The Revisionaries, if you want to see kind of an on-the-ground look of the people involved and how this is happening. And just a few days ago, the Republican-controlled state Board of Education in Texas voted along party lines 10-5 to approve some incredibly biased and inaccurate textbooks. The textbooks were written to align with instructional standards that the Board of Education approved back in 2010, with the explicit intention of forcing social studies teaching to adhere to a conservative Christian agenda. Talk about separation of church and state. Talk about not putting one religion over another. In essence, Christians in Texas Christian conservatives have forced a false historical narrative into public textbooks. And the big thing with these new approved pieces of material, this is just so insane. They've now portrayed in the official Texas public school social studies curriculum Moses as an influence on the Constitution and the Old Testament as the root of American democracy. Now, credible historians are saying that this is a misguided attempt to suggest biblical origins for the Constitution, and that it could lead students to believe that Moses was the first American or a sort of founding father, right up there with the actual contemporaries that were alive and in the U.S. at the time of the country's creation. Scholars say that this is part of a concerted effort by the Christian extremists to promote the idea that the U.S. is a redeemer nation, giving a divine justification for national exceptionalism. This is so sickening, Lewis. And I know some people will write to me and they'll say, but David, most of the founding fathers were religious. And that's fine. They were religious. That doesn't mean that we put Moses, a figure within a particular religion, there in the same context as the actual founding fathers of this country. And don't take my word for it. The actual scholars, education scholars who have looked at this said, this is going to make children think that Moses was a founding father. It's insane that this is happening.
And it's not surprising that this is happening in Texas. The battle continues here. And if this thing is allowed to keep happening, if this thing were allowed to happen across the country, this type of thing, we would regress as a nation. And in 50 years, we'd probably look something like Iran. And it's, it's not going to happen everywhere, but I don't like it still.
Emil Lester is a professor of history in the Department of Political Science and International Affairs at the University of Mary Washington, says the textbooks contain inventions and exaggerations about Christianity's influence on the founding fathers, and thus contains inventions and exaggerations about the founding of American democracy. I am just so saddened by the fact that this has now become an effective method for the Christian right to inject false, laughable assertions about history into public school curriculum. Remember, if you want to do this stuff in private school, that's bad enough, but do it in private school. But now to be injecting this into public schools is insane. This is the same logic, though, that they use for teaching children about hell, which is, listen, it doesn't matter if it's an exaggeration. If it leads to children being raised in a way we think will be better, then it's justified, which is the same thing that, teach kids about hell so that they'll be scared into acting the way we want, even if it's not real, although many of them believe it is real.
Right. And I think the story is also a good example of how important local elections can be because, here we're talking about the types of people that end up in the positions they do largely because of local elections.
A liberal 2016 poll has Elizabeth Warren crushing Hillary Clinton. There are real differences between Hillary Clinton and Elizabeth Warren, as we've talked about many times before. And it is unlikely at this point that the more progressive of the two, Elizabeth Warren, is going to run for president. But remember, she would be, if she were to run in 2016, Elizabeth Warren would be in a similar position to that in which President Obama found himself when he decided to run during his first term as U.S. Senator. The poll has 42% of respondents favoring Elizabeth Warren, and Vermont Senator Bernie Sanders is second at 24%. Hillary Clinton third at 23%. This is a 2016 presidential pulse poll conducted by progressive grassroots organization Democracy for America. Surprised by these numbers, Lewis?
Yeah, I think I am a little bit surprised. But realistically, do we think that Warren actually has a shot at beating Clinton? I would say there's no possible way.
Well, that's the thing. I don't know the answer to that. But remember, if we think about this as a kind of non-election year CPAC straw poll, let's look at the CPAC straw poll. Mitt Romney did win it in 2012, but in 2013 and 2014, Rand Paul won the CPAC straw poll. I don't think anybody thinks Rand Paul is going to be the Republican nominee. Ron Paul won in 2010 and 2011. He never became the Republican nominee. We had George Allen, who won in 2006, Rudy Giuliani in 2005. These off-year polls of one party or those on one side of the political spectrum rarely, that doesn't mean never, but rarely actually tell us much about who will be the eventual nominee on the election year.
That is true. And I know that Warren is in a similar position that Obama was in originally. And but that was, of course, before Clinton was Secretary of State. So, we can add that to her resume now.
But even still, Lewis, even if this doesn't tell us much about who is likely to be the eventual nominee, it does tell us quite a bit about the direction that many party members would like to see their party go. The strong support for Ron Paul Rand Paul shows us that even if they don't end up having much of an influence in the eventual primaries, there's a strong contingent that would like to see the Republican Party go more libertarian. And this at least tells us that there's certainly a contingent within the Democratic Party that would like to see it go more to the left.
That's true. These numbers are encouraging. And I suppose I would still like to see Warren run just to get her name out there, possibly for the future.
The Bill Cosby rape and sexual assault allegations continue, including allegations that he drugged women and that then they woke up, oftentimes missing clothing. We also have now heard from an ex-NBC employee who says that they were directly involved in helping Bill Cosby to pay off women so that they would not go public with their allegations of Bill Cosby's sexual misconduct. And Lewis, we have to deal with this in a very direct way because after we covered this last week, people started flipping out on me. There were these defenders of Bill Cosby saying, David, you're calling him guilty when he hasn't even been charged. David, you are saying this in spite of the fact that there is no evidence whatsoever that Bill Cosby did anything wrong. We need to clarify this because there is a contingent that is all about just defending men in general against any allegations of sexual misconduct. And we need to really analyze what I said first of all. So let me speak in no uncertain terms. From a legal perspective, of course, Bill Cosby is innocent until proven guilty. He has not been charged. The statute of limitations has expired likely for many of the individuals making these allegations. This is an opinion show. I don't know how many times I have to say this. The program is one where I give my opinion. What is more likely in this case, if we are to think not in terms of the legal system, but in terms of we are rational individuals analyzing what we know? Is it more likely that Bill Cosby sexually assaulted at least some of these women? Or is it more likely that this is a huge conspiracy involving dozens of women over decades, including former NBC employees who have been somehow coerced now that Bill Cosby is 77 years old into making false claims that they were involved in helping Bill Cosby silence accusers? Which one is more likely, Lewis? Not from a legal perspective in terms of legal guilt, but just from a what do we think as random people commenting about what happened?
Yeah, we may not have came out and said this exactly the way you're putting it last time, but we were implying it, suggesting it. And clearly, in my opinion, it would be pretty hard to connect all of these women and draw up a conspiracy. I think that there is probably a good chance that Cosby is guilty, in at least some of these cases.
And again, we're not trying him, right? We're not saying that he is guilty in the legal sense. If the statute of limitations has run out, if there are no charges, then by that sense, he is not guilty legally speaking. We're just saying, did the allegations that he is being accused of happen at least somewhat as described? And I always think back to Occam's razor, Lewis. Occam's razor says that amongst competing hypotheses, the one with the fewest assumptions should be selected as most likely. More complicated solutions may ultimately be correct, but in the absence of certainty, the fewer assumptions that are made, the better. And the fewer assumptions are, these women are telling the truth. At least some of them are. There is no far-reaching broad conspiracy.
And there's a chance that he may never be found guilty because of the statutes that are in place here. And let's not forget that everyone has defenders when stories like this break. Even the Tsarnaev brothers have plenty of defenders.
For those saying that the women are doing this for publicity, let's just analyze that at its face. Who has ever built a career on the publicity received from false rape allegations? Is that ever the thing that gives someone any kind of real career? And to go further, women know that when you make rape allegations, regardless of whether they're real or not. And I hesitate to even say that, because why should we even presume that women who make rape allegations are the ones that are lying? You're exposing yourself. So the idea that these women, sometimes over a period of decades, for people saying all the accusations came at once, over a period of decades, that they're trying to simply get publicity, not only is it offensive to the purported victims here, it's also a really stupid accusation to make about them.
And I just don't think it's logical to assume that the sheer number of women we're talking about here, many of whom have had successful careers and really have no reason to try and get publicity, would be doing this for that reason. It just doesn't make any sense.
And turning Bill Cosby into the victim of some kind of witch hunt of the supposed conspiracy at 77 years old. There's a conspiracy now where he is the victim of this witch hunt, and he just had nothing to do with any of this stuff. Separate yourselves for a second from a legal defense. We're not talking about legal guilt. My opinion, as someone who has just seen everything that has come forward, is that it is incredibly unlikely that this is a concocted conspiracy theory of dozens of allegations against a 77-year-old man.
Agreed. And why Bill Cosby? Ask yourself that. Why would he be, the target in a witch hunt?
All right. I know we will get feedback that will be negative. I don't care, because if you are going to rally around this guy based on the idea that there's this conspiracy to attack him, I'm not going to sympathize with you, unfortunately. Let's take a break. Back after this.
The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com. Welcome back to the David Pakman Show.
The David Pakman Show membership program is made possible in part by liberalbias.com. Liberalbias.com is your best source for unbiased news, because spending $1 trillion on war is freedom and liberty, but we just don't have the money for liberal Big Bird. If that sounds unbiased to you, you will love liberalbias.com. Today's new member of the day is Kirsten Richards. Kirsten, thank you for being a David Pakman Show member, and you can join Kirsten with a free Patriot Mail calendar for 2015 at davidpakman.com/calendar15. Okay, the Republican Koch-influenced House has passed a bill that muzzles EPA scientists. The House passed a bill that ensures, quote, the right kind of scientists are doling out advice on environmental protections. Republicans in the House passed legislation to guarantee the oil industry scientists that are loyal to the Kochs and not independent scientists will serve on the Environmental Protection Agency's Science Advisory Board. The rule change prohibits scientists who are not employed by the oil industry from talking about or giving advice based on independent scientific research, and prevents them from applying for grants from the EPA for further research. This passed 229 to 191. It is House Resolution 1422. And this, Lewis, shows us the Kochification of the U.S. House of Representatives and subsequently of the EPA. Why have independent scientists review stuff? Just oil industry scientists should give us their opinions.
The Kochification has been happening for quite a while, but it's going to be a lot easier to Kochify now, especially once we have all those new Republicans in office.
Republican Jim McGovern, my representative in Massachusetts, was blunt in saying, quote, I get it. You don't like science, and you don't like science that interferes with the interests of your corporate clients. But we need science to protect public health and the environment. Couldn't really say it better than that, and I hope and have been told that President Obama will veto this if it gets to his desk. Let's hope that is a reality, Lewis, because this is just a very, very dangerous bill.
I wish that the president could speak to the American people about a bill like this when it lands on his desk,
right?
And tell them exactly what's going on. But unfortunately, that type of thing just doesn't happen.
If you think for a second that this anti-science movement is kind of innocuous and isolated and doesn't affect the real world, look at this. Here's a way in which it would directly affect the real world. It would directly impact the restrictions that are placed on pollution, which directly affect our planet. and directly affect your health. So don't forget that, ladies and gentlemen. Rudy Giuliani, the former Republican mayor of New York City and many-time presidential, at least early contender, has reached a new low, saying that we need lots of white cops in black neighborhoods to protect the black people from killing each other. He was tired of hearing the criticisms of disproportionate representation of white police officers in predominantly minority neighborhoods, and he went on Meet the Press, and he basically ignored the reality that the myth of black-on-black violence is a myth and said the following.
How do you make a police force that looks like the community they serve?
Well, I mean, starting with Mayor Koch, Mayor Dinkins, myself, Mayor Bloomberg, and now Mayor de Blasio, we've tried very hard to make the police force in New York City as proportionate as we possibly can. We go out of our way to do that. I think we do a pretty good job, not a perfect job. But the reality is...
You're not on this list, so that's a good thing.
Right. I was glad to see that we weren't, by the way. But the fact is, I find it very disappointing that you're not discussing the fact that 93% of blacks in America are killed by other blacks. We're talking about the exception here.
Well, look, first of all, go ahead, Michael. No, but this is about a trust issue.
We are talking about the significant exception. 93% of blacks are killed by other blacks.
Let me respond to that.
I would like to see the attention. I'd like to see the attention paid to that you are paying to this, and the solutions to that.
He's taking up time. Can I say this? First of all, most black people who commit crimes against other black people go to jail. Number two, they are not sworn by the police department as a agent of the state to uphold the law. So in both cases, that's a false equivalency that the mayor has drawn, which is exacerbated tensions that are deeply embedded in American culture. Black people who kill black people go to jail. Black people who kill black people go to jail. White people who are policemen who kill black people do not go to jail. If a jury can indict a ham sandwich, why is it taking so long?
Mr. Mayor, let me ask you, it's the trust issue, though. This is a trust issue.
It's hardly insignificant.
I didn't say it was insignificant. I said it was out of proportion in your false equivalency, sir.
It is the reason for the heavy police presence in the black community.
Not at all. Not at all.
93%.
The police presence cannot make a distinction between those who are criminals and those who call the police.
Exactly, Lewis. The reason for all of those white police officers is all those black people are killing each other in spite of the fact that, as we recently reported on, an actual empirical analysis of the data shows us that white people are essentially the same, they have the same probability of being attacked violently by a white person than a black person is to be attacked violently by another black person. Rudy doesn't care.
No, this is weird because it seems like he's trying to deflect, but he deflects and just makes things 1,000 times worse for himself. And, you know, it's too bad that we're hearing from him again because this type of thing is just nonsense. And I know people like listening to him. He has some sway.
Why doesn't anyone talk about the white-on-white violence epidemic? I mean, every member of a race is more likely to be killed by a member of that same race than another in general, based on how populations are distributed. It's connected to lots of other things which we could talk about, but that's the reality. Really a new low for Rudy Giuliani. Maybe he's just ignorant to the facts. I wish someone would tell him what the reality is. We've talked about this many times, Lewis, around Thanksgiving time. Walmart, once again, is putting out, some employees have put out a bin asking for food donations for fellow employees who simply can't afford to feed themselves. About a year ago, we had a headline from a Walmart in Ohio that made news for this kind of employee collection for other employees. And the latest bin was posted to the Facebook page of Making Change at Walmart. It is presumably from an Oklahoma Walmart, store number 3430. On the one hand, it's a good thing that workers are looking out for coworkers and helping them to get the food that they need for the holiday season. On the other hand, when we know that Walmart pays such terrible wages, and if you're going to email me the statistic saying the average wage is like 14 or 17 bucks an hour, yes, when you average in the significantly higher salaries of the store management and other management positions, it raises it. But the average lower level, mid-level Walmart employee does not make a lot of money. And the fact that you need to have such a drive just so the employees can feed themselves tells us a lot about how problematic this situation is.
Yeah, the Walmart spokespeople also like to add in that only like 6,000 to 8,000 Walmart employees make minimum wage. Well, guess what? Someone who makes 20 cents an hour over minimum wage still isn't making a livable wage.
No, it's practically speaking not different at all. And the Walmart CEO recently stated that they're considering supporting a federal increase to the minimum wage, and they acknowledged that it would boost the income of a lot of the people that shop in their stores, basic demand side economics. But the nonsense to me is if you recognize that an increase to the minimum wage would give people who shop in your stores more money, you don't need to wait for that increase to the minimum wage before giving all of your employees a raise. You could do it right now, saying, well, we might be supportive of this happening federally because we recognize it would be a good thing. You can take action right now, Louis. You don't need to wait for the federal government to act.
They could. Maybe there are some execs at Walmart who know that that a hike in the minimum wage will be the best thing to ever happen to this company. Of course, that's only because they have a stranglehold on the U.S. marketplace.
No question about it. We will take a break. Follow me on Twitter, twitter.com/dpacman.
The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com. Welcome back to the David Pakman Show.
Luke Vargas is the United Nations correspondent for Talk Radio News Service. He's joined us in the past from Jordan, Poland, Colombia, Ukraine, who knows where else. And today he actually joins us from Italy, but Luke has been spending time in Tunisia. Tunisia, a country that just went to the polls to pick its first president in democratic elections. Luke, before we get to those elections, first of all, happy birthday yesterday. I found out you and Louis actually share the same birthday. Let's start with that and what it's like in Tunisia. Tell us what the political climate has been like.
It's been pretty crazy. So most of your viewers will probably remember Tunisia. It's the birthplace of the Arab Spring. It's where the so-called Jasmine Revolution occurred. It was a largely peaceful and pretty much successful revolution in which a fruit seller who was unable to access any sort of judicial redress for his grievances sort of set himself on fire, and it sparked successful protests that saw a dictator of 24 years step down. In the 4 years since that revolution, an Islamist party essentially came into power, and then they've, I guess you could say, been washed away. They're not gone exactly like the Muslim Brotherhood. They haven't been persecuted and banned as terrorists, but they've sort of been humbled by the difficulties of governing. And in their place, a more moderate and secular party has come into power. And, you know, demographically speaking, I think this country is pretty interesting and sort of reflects that change you've seen in politics. It's a very young country. It's suffering from what we call a youth bulge, which is too many young people, too few jobs. It's a problem that's very much the case in Egypt and a lot of other countries where there have been revolutions, whether failed or successful. And it's an incredibly educated population, so it compounds the sort of political challenge of those number of unemployed people. Let's look at women. You have a new constitution in Tunisia that says there's supposed to be equal participation in the workforce between men and women, yet only 28% of women are either working or seeking jobs. It's an astoundingly low number. Religiously, there's also a dichotomy. Everyone in Tunisia identifies pretty much as a Muslim. It's the official state religion, yet at the same time, surveys show that only about 50% of the population actually steps foot in a mosque in the average year. And again, you have a rise of secularists, but you have a large number of the population that's actually supportive of the Islamic State. The New York Times just wrote recently about the fact that Tunisia has sent this extraordinarily high number of people to go and fight with the group. So, you know, the constitution in some ways might have settled some of the issues, patched over these dichotomies, but the population is not by any means all in agreement.
So we have these demographic challenges. We have, as you talk about, a primarily Muslim population that at the same time is not necessarily going to mosques, increasingly secular. So now we go to the election. This, as I mentioned, the first ostensibly democratic election. When people hear that, they might think, oh, it must be just like an election in the U.S. Is that actually the case?
No, it's not really the case, and it's been strange for me to observe, having covered two presidential elections. There are a lot of changes. First off, there are a ton of candidates, that, both in the parliamentary elections last month and in these presidential elections. Actually, over 200 registered political parties in Tunisia. There were 27 candidates in this election, though, to some extent, there's not a whole lot of light between many of them. In the interest of guiding, I think, this country through its early democratic phase, this electoral authority, which was put in charge of running this vote, has put a lot of restrictions on what the campaigns can do. And that's what I think really distinguishes Tunisia from, for example, the United States. The first thing that I noticed was so strange is there are all these restrictions on advertising. You can't just put up billboards all over the city. There are restrictions on where you can put those ads. As you drive around parts of the capital, you see these spray-painted sort of boxes that almost looks like a calendar with 27 different areas for the candidates, and each of those candidates is numbered, and they can only put up their advertisement within that set space. They're not yard signs or leaflets all over the place. Another thing which I found pretty interesting is there's a ban on political polling for the 3 weeks leading up to the vote. So newspapers can sort of speculate who's doing well based on crowd sizes, but they can't cite any statistics to talk about their support on the population. And my final thing that I thought was really different is there's a ban on political activity in the run-up to the elections, about sort of a 24 to 48-hour period. They're called silent days. This is something that occurs in various European countries, and I think really what's interesting about this, and it sort of worked out well for me, is there are no big rallies around Tunis in the days up to the election, which actually made it very easy for me to go to the campaigns, talk to the spokespeople, because they can't be on television. They can't be jet-setting around the country with their candidates. They're just sort of sitting in their offices waiting and letting the people go out and vote. So you take all these things together, it's sort of like training wheels for a young democracy. Pretty interesting to observe and very different from covering politics in the United States.
Yeah, well, I mean, we've talked here about how the level of discourse has really suffered as a result of many factors. And this includes, of course, attack ads. This includes the way in which elections and campaigns are funded. We've had that conversation many, many times here. I'd be curious, in what you observed in Tunisia, do these restrictions on campaign activity allow for a higher level of discourse?
I think so. At the end of the day, the weaknesses, I think, in the system are due to the candidates themselves, the fact that these parties haven't had, frankly, just a number of years to really define their own ideology. So many different political parties, really, or anyone who wanted to talk about various policy alternatives to Ben Ali when that regime was in power, was prohibited from doing so. So they're sort of young in their ideologies in a way. But let's look at those silent days. I think this is an amazing policy that could be picked up in the U.S. to great effect. And it's not just for voters that, for example, those silent days are in effect. I talked to electoral authorities and other poll watchers and activists who said this is really great for the media, and I can attest to this. If I'm covering campaign events for months on end, following Mitt Romney around the country, and then election day comes around, I've got no gas left in the tank. I write a crummy article about the election results. It's formulaic. It doesn't really think about the implications of the vote. It actually gives the media time to literally take a break before the vote. It also gives, and the argument I was told, is it gives civil society some time to think about the work that needs to be done after the election takes place. Yet, I'll point out there's still loopholes. There are, like in any country where there are democratic politics, politics is politics. These campaigns are always trying to figure out ways to break some of these laws. I thought what was very interesting, there's this ban on wearing political advertising when you go into a polling place. You can't hold a sign inside of an American polling place either, but you could have a pin if you wanted to, or a sticker. That's banned. But what I heard about from some electoral monitors, rather, was that people would wear soccer jerseys that had a number on the back, and it would correspond with one of the 1 through 27 numbered candidates. It's, a sort of a way of, plausible deniability that you're with the campaign. Another one, though, is I was going to some of these interviews with party officials, and at one party they gave me this 200-page election manifesto, essentially the party position playbook. And I was walking around the Capitol with it, reading it in French and trying to figure out what it said. And I almost walked into a polling place with it, and it had a party logo on it. And very easily I could have run afoul of these pretty restrictive laws. So I do think it helped to contribute to the political dialogue.
So last thing, in just the limited time we have left, the election happened. How did it go? What were the results?
It was very smooth. There wasn't violence, even though the borders were closed. There have been terrorist threats against some of these candidates. There isn't a winner quite yet. There's going to be a runoff in late December, but it looks like the man who's going to win, his name's Essebsi. He represents this moderate coalition called Nida Tunis, which means the call of Tunisia. But I'll point out there are allegations that he's not a fresh face. He is 87 years old, so he really is quite an aged person. And there's allegations that, look, even though his party says we've brought in all these experienced people from the past, they are from old regimes. They said we're not going to allow anyone who's been found of committing a human rights violation. But it's a party filled with many old faces, and so it may not represent change. If we could talk forever, there was an Islamist party that came in second. It doesn't look like they're going to win anytime soon. They've been dragged down by some of the difficulties of governing over the past few years. But look, this concept that Tunisia's next president is going to be able to govern in some sort of post-political climate, I think isn't going to last for long. There are divisions in society. The political, process is maturing, and that is inevitably going to mean people trying to break the rules, and increasingly, probably partisan conflict. It's not the United States, and it's not as partisan as we are. It's a beautiful thing to watch, sort of a first democratic presidential election. But you can see the challenges that await this country. They need to crack down on corruption. They need to go after people who are breaking the rules in order for this to not just be a one-time good election, but an electoral process that can sustain itself and pay dividends for the people of Tunisia for many years to come.
We've been speaking with Luke Vargas, United Nations correspondent for Talk Radio News Service, joining us today on his birthday, the day after his birthday, from Ostia, Italy, just after his time in Tunisia. Luke, pleasure as always. Enjoy the rest of your trip.
Thanks so much, David. Take care.
The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com. The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com.
Welcome back to the show. Great to have you with us today. We've talked many times about the incredibly damaging so-called ex-gay therapy. This sometimes involves praying away your homosexuality. Sometimes involves doing very, very strange exercises with a so-called therapist who is actually just some often unlicensed Christian counselor. And we now have learned that the former director of one of these ex-gay ministries that endorsed very, very aggressive conversion therapy has married his same-sex partner in a ceremony performed in Oklahoma. This is John Smid, who was the director of Love in Action, a Memphis-based group about which he once said, "I would rather you commit suicide than have you leave Love in Action wanting to return to the gay lifestyle." This was an insanely dangerous group. They were the subject of protests in 2005 after a gay teen who was being forced to attend it posted this camp that they did. It was a straight camp, posted the rules to his blog. Smid would appear on Fox News, etc., etc. Shortly after closing the refuge in 2007, Smid resigned as the executive director of Love in Action. 4 years later, divorced his wife. A year later, met the man who would ultimately become his husband, Larry McQueen. On Facebook, Smid wrote, "I realized this week that my relationship with Larry is a mirror I see in every day. For most of my life, the mirror I saw reflected my mistakes, shortcomings, failures. The reflection I see today with Larry shows me the positive things in my life." He and his husband were married, as I said, in a ceremony in Oklahoma because Texas still refuses to issue same-sex marriages. Obviously, right? I mean, what else is there to say here, Lewis? Obviously, there is no such thing as reparative ex-gay conversion therapy. It is dangerous. You might be able to get someone not to live a life that corresponds with their sexuality, but you cannot change their sexuality.
Yeah, whether or not the ex-gay therapists realize that that's what's happening, ultimately all they can do is try and suppress this in someone. Well, yeah. And it's not going to work. But the ex-gay therapists are probably just going to say that this guy's an exception to their I don't know, their process.
Of course, they will write it off. And the saddest part is great. We've heard about this guy's story, and now, even though who knows how many lives he's ruined, he now at least is able to live his life as himself, as who he truly is. But think about how many people are still in this type of pray away the gay voodoo nonsense around the country. And it doesn't matter for them that this guy now is living his life in a real way. They're still in this highly dangerous stuff, which should be completely made against the law.
Very true. I am glad, though, that he did come out and admit that this was what was happening, because he could have easily just slipped off the radar and not let anyone know what was really going on. But at least now the people he tried to help will see what happened with him.
A teen with cancer says he was fired for needing time off for cancer surgery. This is a 19-year-old delivery driver diagnosed with cancer, says he was fired from his job at a suburban Chicago restaurant when he told his employer he needs to take 6 weeks off for cancer surgery. This is Jonathan Larson, diagnosed with cancer of the brain and spine. He's had several rounds of radiation and needs back surgery. The surgery would require him to take time off as a delivery driver, understandably. The restaurant is Naperville, Illinois' Rosebud Restaurant. I'm almost positive I've been to this restaurant, Lewis. When I went to a wedding in Naperville, Illinois, I am almost 100% convinced I've been here. It's not particularly good, I'll tell you, from what I recall.
So it's a chain restaurant.
It's a group of restaurants. But no, I mean, it's a group of restaurants called the Rosebud something or other. Oh. And they're all, I believe, in the same area or generally in the Midwest. Correct me if I'm wrong. But this particular one, I've been to this particular one in Naperville called Rosebud Restaurant. The teen offered to come back to work after the surgery. He says his boss didn't change his mind. My manager said, no, by that time I'll already have another driver hired. Just leave. I have to make some phone calls. And a spokesman for Rosebud Restaurant said they couldn't comment on specific personnel matters due to employee confidentiality standards. If this is true, Lewis, this is truly, truly disgusting. And I know what people will say. Listen, it's a delivery driver. You need to be there. This is not his career. Why? He'll just find another delivery driver job. If this is the way that Rosebud deals with these types of diagnoses, it shows a total lack of empathy. And I don't care if they were within their legal rights. I don't care if this wasn't the 19-year-old forever job. This is just not the way I would handle employees.
It doesn't seem like the right way to go about it. Perhaps if he was a lousy delivery driver, this was an easy way for management to kind of unload him. But, we don't have any evidence of that. It just seems like like you said, it's a total lack of empathy. Yeah,
and we're going to see what ultimately results from this. They have not, there's not been a determination as to what else is going to happen here. But as I read the story, I just thought, even if you want to get rid of this individual, are you paying them so much that you can't just say, come right back, we're looking forward to having you back? It's something to look forward to after you go through what is clearly going to be a very difficult medical procedure. I don't know, Lewis. That's just me. Maybe I'm stupid. Maybe I don't understand business.
Well, we get lots of emails saying you're stupid, so I don't know whether to listen to you or those emails.
We have a voicemail number, 219-2-DAVID-P. Let's take a listen.
Hi, David and Lewis. I was wondering if you had 3 wishes, which one would you choose? To eliminate or erase any evidence of religion, to erase or eliminate any evidence of the Republican Party,
okay,
or have as much money in the world as you could possibly have, or none of the above. Please let me know what you think.
If I had 3 wishes, why would I have to choose one? I would choose all 3. I think maybe I'm missing something in this voicemail, Lewis. I'm not totally sure. But as he said, if I had 3 wishes, I would have 3. So that would mean I wouldn't have to choose between the 3. I would just have all 3 of them. On today's bonus show, Venice wants to outlaw wheeled suitcases. Google is testing an ad-free web experiment and an underwater city concept. All of that and more on today's bonus show. Go to davidpakman.com/membership. Become a member. Get access to the bonus show, the commercial-free podcast feed, the commercial-free TV show, and so much other great stuff. And get the free calendar for a couple more weeks at davidpakman.com/calendar15.
The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com.